So this is a quote from a student paper. He's a senior at NYU. In order to understand the forces at play today which preempt the unity of the poor, it's important to recognize that the struggle for hegemony, the battle for hearts and minds, is fought on a different terrain and with different tools than in previous periods of history. The ubiquitous and constant presence of the internet in our lives is especially important in considering the changing character of hegemonic and counter-hegemonic projects. Ideas, stories, values, frameworks, and other ideological elements are increasingly produced and distributed with the aid of advanced web-based instant communication technologies. What's important to draw from this fact is that the movement to end poverty, or any movement for social justice, must achieve mastery over the most advanced forms of communication available and even invent new tools for communication that suit our needs. The need for this stems from the central importance of ideological struggle as opposed to, for example, military struggle in class conflict today, and from the central importance of these means of communications in ideological struggle. He's 21. And then a shorter quote from a colleague of mine, Steve Duncombe. Today, the political landscape is one of signs and symbols, story and spectacle. Responding to this new terrain, there has been an upsurge in the use of creative, artistic, and cultural strategies as a tool for social change. This practice goes by many names: political art, activist art, interventionist art, socially engaged art, and social practice art. No matter the description, artists are using their aesthetic training and skill to wage battles for social change. So I think these two quotes are interesting, and they both talk about the importance, even the centrality of semiotics, or signs and symbols, which Steve calls, within social struggle. And this has become a kind of received knowledge, kind of just an assumption today that the terrain of culture, specifically in this case visual culture, since I'm talking about visual culture, is that this is the front line, or a front line in the struggle for a more just and sustainable world. And so we've all become semiotic guerrilla warriors, and we spend a lot of time and energy and resources thinking about how to create and deploy effective images. But sometimes I, for one, am someone who's involved clearly in a project to which this is central. I question how we go about this and actually how we conceive of this enterprise. As Steve points out, we look to artists frequently to do this work. They're, after all, the experts on aesthetics, right? The MFA degree means that you're going to be able to produce the culture we need to foment an insurgency. But maybe not. I would say that the most adept and capable at manipulating signs and symbols are marketers and PR firms. They're the ones that really study how images and texts and music lands on an audience and moves them this way or that way. And I mean study. They measure brain activity, sweat. They do focus groups on, Frank Lutz is a great example of this, but there's lots of examples. These men and women are the primary architects of what we refer to as the spectacle, a world that appears to us as natural and inevitable, but which is in truth a highly produced totality from which hegemony, fancy word, springs. And they're not really on our side. They aren't artists, they're ad men. And this begs the question of whether or not we ought to expect to be able to foment a true revolution when using the same strategies of the ad men. It's an old question, but a good one. Can we use the master's tool to dismantle his house? And this is actually a real question for me, because I see large NGOs, left projects, campaigns, including Greenpeace or Sierra Club, 350.org, with whom I truly admire and love. And I see their logos and their image strategies, some of which I've participated in, and I just see a professionalized left that is well-meaning, but ultimately seems to be their images seem to be absorbed into this complex and dizzying visual landscape that is our current condition. And beyond the question of efficacy, there are other reasons to be suspicious of this strategy. I mean, what we're really talking about is propaganda. And who historically has been the most adept at using propaganda? Fascists and capitalists. This is their terrain, and many artists run from that terrain, and with good reason. And they seek ways to talk about the world that go beyond representation and dig into the interlocking complexities of our postmodern condition. That's what art school students are trained to think about and to think of as art. The contemporary art world, constituted of galleries, museums, and critics, and schools, and magazines, is generally more comfortable with the provisional or the propositional. It's not in keeping with fine art practice to offer a path of action, a solution to a problem. That is didacticism, the very opposite of art. or so the institutions of art say. So I think that if we're to properly understand ourselves as semiotic warriors, then we need to make peace with the fact that we're going to be using the master's tools to take down the master's house, but we need to think creatively and strategically to find the advantageous asymmetries that are inherent within this system of spectacle. We must exploit the contradictions. For example, the admin and marketers are constantly on the lookout for the authentic. They'll sponsor your party and give you free beer just to insert one branded image with that real authentic situation and that real cool party, and maybe you'll want to drink the PBR too, Pabst Blue Ribbon. I'm actually mentioning this because this happened at our fundraiser party last weekend. This is a little aside, but we had a fundraiser and we had a bunch of PBR donated, and by our collective member, one of our collective members sort of hooked this up, like 5 cases of Pabst Blue Ribbon, and we were like, great. And what he didn't tell us was that he had made an arrangement with PBR to post photographs from our party on our Facebook page. They wanted to know our Facebook reach, our Twitter reach, and so we have amazing images of our party with like people like holding up PBR. So this came out after the party at our meeting, and I was like, Kyle, what the hell are you thinking? I'm not so down with that. I would like to have known that I was going to be participating in PBR's ad campaign. So that's one sort of contradiction: the need for authenticity, the sort of endless quest of marketers and admin to plumb the real, to find the authentic, and it's hard to fake authenticity, and it's compelling as hell. Another example, and it's related, is risk-taking, real risk-taking, risk of bodily injury, risk of ridicule, risk of arrest or prison. Some of these situations can be manufactured, of course. Reality TV is full of them. You can offer people money to take dumb risks. But for people to take risks for the pure joy of it or for a cause, that's pretty compelling too. And this is where we are strong and they are weak, where we are deep and resilient and they are brittle. In this case, the Illuminator's tactic of guerrilla projection capitalizes on this particular advantageous asymmetry. The images, the photos, are often very beautiful as aesthetic productions in themselves, but more importantly, they're charged. They have a charge to them that is tied to the act of trespass, whether or not that trespass is literal or figurative. There is the evident risk, even though it might be low. It is a spectacle, but the tools that we use to create it are clearly DIY, scrappy, of the people, and authentic. And if you think about it, this was also the heart of the success of the Occupy movement, and say what you want about that particular moment, but it was certainly powerful. Cardboard signs, nothing fancy. The authenticity of that moment and of those expressions was what made the images ring out and carry. And think about, these days, I think about the kids who are doing the tar sands blockade more than I think about 350.org, the kids down in Texas and other places where they're throwing their bodies on the line. And it's really clear that they're taking real risks. And obviously the civil rights movement. Think of the obvious risk and the courage. The stakes are real. They have to be real. And that's what makes these images travel. So, I think a lot of the image strategizing that gets done by the sort of more professional left seems to forget this, seems to sort of want to use these master's tools without any real understanding of where these asymmetries actually lie, where these sort of interstitial spaces are. So I don't pretend to have any certain answers to the question of effective semiotic guerrilla warfare. But it seems to me that there are cracks in this edifice of power, and where we can inject a radical analysis, or at least undermine the seeming inevitability of this spectacular failure that is late capitalism, which is a carefully crafted kind of seeming, as I've indicated. I've talked about a couple of ways, but there are other ways, innumerable ways of intervening and undermining, of fomenting insurrectionary possibilities, despite the power of this spectacular culture. And I want to pick up on some of the stuff that other people said, then that we need to go to make sure that we're going beyond the symbolic and beyond this sort of semiotic plane, and really for there to be real stakes. And the last thing I'll say is just the whole notion of expertise, like I'm up here in a panel and saying fancy things, I'm using words like hegemony and semiotics, but the truth is that everything I've said is really simple and really obvious. A 10-year-old understands what I just said intuitively on a very root level. And there's nothing there's no need for real expertise in direct action. It's really a matter of going out and trying yourself. Some of the stuff that we do is there's some technology involved, but I didn't know how to use this technology before I had the idea of throwing images up on the Verizon building. I mean, I knew how to use a projector, but that's not that hard. And mostly it's an organizing project. Mostly it's failure and like productive failure, figuring failing better next time. So I think that's all I got to say. This is the Illuminator project. We throw light on buildings all over the place, and we've been doing it for about 1.5 years. And I'll give it up to Nadine, who I think will do a better job than I would have in summing all this up.